Hello, this is going to be the one or single lecture video covering 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8. So what I'm going to do here is flip through the textbook pages and point out some things and verbally give you a few tips and tidbits. And then I'm going to click on a couple of website links to show you some information on the screen. And I'm going to try to make this fairly brief and consolidated for your benefit. So the next 3 chapters go together, hence the logical sequence. So we've looked at the macronutrients. You now know that those are the energy-yielding nutrients, and therefore they all 3 contain calories. Now we're moving on to chapter 6 and 7, which comprise the micronutrients, which are also essential chemicals for sustenance. However, remember they are non-caloric. And then the 6th class of nutrients that you're now familiar with, which is water. You're going to find that vitamins and minerals often work in concert with one another, so they work in a harmonious fashion in many instances. They are very distinct and separate substances. I know that in the layman's world, people often say vitamins and minerals as if that's one thing, but they are 2 distinct substances with their unique functions. And you're going to find that water is a key factor because water is the medium in which everything occurs, right? All of these chemical reactions occur within water because your body is largely comprised of water. So if you feel comfortable with that and you feel like you have a good handle on chapters 1 through 5, then you are ready to move forward. As always, you have these learning objectives, and really you want to walk away understanding the connection between vitamins and health maintenance. You want to be able to have at least some inkling of what sort of signs and symptoms would be indicative of a vitamin deficiency. And keep in mind that if there are visible signs and symptoms, then that would indicate a true or genuine deficiency, because it would literally be manifesting itself as some sort of a deficiency disease, right? So how do you remedy a vitamin deficiency? You remedy it with vitamins. Does that mean you go buy pills? Not necessarily. You try to utilize diet first and foremost. If it's appropriate under the circumstances, you look to see where the gaps are, why it is that this person might not be getting enough of X vitamin, and hence they actually have so little of it in their body that they are suffering from a deficiency disease of that vitamin. If you cannot find that diet is the culprit, because it may not be, then the question is, what is the culprit? Sometimes we're going to know that in advance because we know that certain diseases promote malabsorption or impair the body's utilization of certain nutrients. But in some cases, the physical manifestations of a vitamin deficiency are an indication that there is some sort of underlying process that needs to be addressed. So very seldomly is it just a matter of someone not eating enough of something. It's usually another problem in the body preventing the body from utilizing what it is getting. I hope that makes sense. It will make more sense as you read. So let me begin to click through. So the did you know is always very valuable. I recommend every time, of course, that you start right there and wrap your head around those things. On this assignment, there are a lot of vocabulary words. Not every single one that's listed here is on your assignment, but there are a lot of these words that I did put on the assignment because not only are they applicable to this chapter, but they are going to be beneficial to you in later chapters and obviously in your overall profession. So this course is often one where people learn a lot of medical terminology, and as you've probably realized now, a lot of times people either learn or refine their understanding of anatomy and physiology, and certainly gain insights into the world of chemistry, particularly biochemistry. So we're really doing a lot of things here, and I hope that by the time it's all over, you're just going to be wowed with how much you've grown and what you know. So vitamins in health, it talks about how we came to discover deficiency diseases, and you know, people used to travel great distances by sea sea well before we had all these planes, trains, and automobiles. And if you think about it, you would load food, you would make months-long journeys across sea, and obviously the perishables would be consumed first or would perish, and then they would have things like tinned meats and stuff remaining. So imagine living off of Spam for months, right? Or the equivalent of it in that day and age. So obviously, people were going to get sick, and that's kind of how we discovered that if somebody is truly deficient in a certain vitamin, they actually develop a disease that is a vitamin deficiency disease. But you have to be grossly deficient in a disease for that to manifest, not just subtly. So there's such thing as a vitamin insufficiency, and then there's a true deficiency. In today's world, we don't encounter deficiencies very often unless there's an underlying impetus for it, alcoholism or some sort of other physical disease. We may encounter some insufficiencies, but the problem is we don't have a lot of good laboratory measures for that. So many times it's more of an assumption than anything, but that also explains why it is that sometimes people who have not been absorbing or utilizing vitamins correctly for some time are completely unaware of it, and it completely escapes healthcare providers until some serious and often irreversible damage has been done. So assays or biomarker tests for things are very expensive. It costs a lot of money to invent them. It costs a lot of money to implement them. And in all honesty, most of what happens in healthcare these days is driven by what insurance will cover. And insurance is going to obviously limit what it covers to rein in cost control. So even some tests that do exist aren't utilized, or at least not in most ordinary settings, and many tests simply don't exist. So you can read a little bit about some of the diseases such as scurvy as it begins here. You're already familiar with the TOUL, the tolerable upper limit. So as with all other nutrients, we are concerned not only with too little, but with too much. And again, as I think you probably understand very well by now, our bigger problem, by and large, in today's world is a concern related to excess. We have swung to the other end of the pendulum in 100 years' time. So you can see here that vitamins are organic compounds. Remember, organic simply means carbon-based, right? So if you don't have a chemistry background that's very strong, that might be something that you tend to forget, especially since you hear the word organic used in a completely different context. So we are using it in chemistry terms. As you click forward, and you look at the functions of vitamins, you can see the 5 different key functions here, even to the extent that sometimes medications are actually, or rather vitamins, I apologize, are actually used as medications, niacin being the most prevalent one. Now, many people are choosing to use vitamin supplements. Remember, that's a man-made or synthesized version of a nutrient put into a capsule or powder form or some other form, tablet, whatever it might be. So when I'm saying vitamins, don't lose sight of the fact that I am speaking of the nutrients contained within food. We only are referring to pills, powders, capsules, and such if we say supplements, right? So the word supplement means in addition to. Hence, supplements are something that, when appropriate, can be used in addition to an appropriate diet, food, to try to treat something. So what I hope you come to realize is, much like so many other things in the world of nutrition, most of the dietary supplements that are being marketed these days are not well regulated and are, quite frankly, largely unnecessary, because they are only really appropriate if you have been instructed by a medical professional, primarily a registered dietitian or a medical doctor, that you actually need one of those supplements. And unfortunately, even then when you procure them, again, they're not well regulated. We're going to look at that a little bit more shortly. So the antioxidants and the free radicals are mentioned here on page 6, and there's a little video clip that I provided for you that I think is excellent. So be sure that you review that, because we're going to come back to those terms in reference to disease processes at a later date. So now is the time to solidify your mind. Hyper, hypo, hopefully everyone knows that hyper is high or elevated and hypo is low. If that's a term, that's how you can remember it. Hypo is low. So I think that common sense would dictate what those terms mean, and therefore when you read them, you won't have a difficult time. You know that there are DRIs for all of the nutrients. You know that some of them are AIs, adequate intake, because all we know thus far is this amount should be adequate. We don't really know what you need. Some have an RDA, this is what you should get, and some have a TUL, don't go over this amount or harm could be done. What you're going to find in your profession, and it's even hard for many healthcare professionals that aren't dietitians or doctors to grasp, is that too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and that anything that can be used medicinally for a beneficial purpose therefore wields enough power that it can be harmful if used inappropriately. So people will say, oh, well, herbs and supplements, vitamins, minerals are really important and helpful. Oh, how could they possibly hurt you? Well, doesn't that sound completely ludicrous when you hear it? That's like, you know, two different sides of the coin right there. You're telling me they're powerful enough to do good, but they can't cause harm. Anything with power is powerful, right? So don't lose sight of that, because that's one of those things that keeps people from broadening their mind and being receptive to the realities of nutrition. So the hot topic talks to you a little bit about choosing a supplement, and it really hits on some important points that you as an individual want to think about, but also as a healthcare professional that you want to reiterate with people you encounter, because like many of you as consumers who have possibly fallen prey to all sorts of gimmicks and misinformation, your customers are in the same boat, right? And even though they may not like to hear what we have to say, and they may choose to resist being receptive to it or choose to refuse to accept it, we are still obligated to try to help people. And you know what? Sometimes helping someone is as simple as keeping them from wasting their money. So you will look here and you will see that there really aren't a lot of fancy, expensive, overpriced vitamins that are beneficial. So I'm going to tell you very quickly a true life story. I have many along these lines, but this is just one. A number of years ago when I was in private practice, and people would call me and they would say, you know, I really need help with my disease, or I really am interested in disease prevention, I would go to their home. I would meet with an individual or a married couple or sometimes an entire family based on their request. And I would educate them, much like you're being educated here, tailoring it to their circumstances. So a man called me and said that his mother, who was in her late 60s, so she wasn't old, mind you, had cancer, lived alone, and had fallen prey to someone who was not a licensed medical practitioner, but had some credentials that his mother deemed to be reliable. And so she was going to this person who had convinced her that juicing fruits and vegetables was going to be an effective therapeutic modality. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be opposed to adding more produce to one's diet, but one point is that juicing is when you extract the fluid and you leave behind all the pulp. In other words, all the fibrous content. And so you are extracting the water with select nutrients contained within it and leaving behind a lot of valuable nutrients and discarding them. It just seems kind of silly when you stop and think about it. So not only was she doing something that had no science to support it in that respect, and in turn neglecting other interventions that could have benefited her, but the same person who was guiding her was suggesting that she needed numerous dietary supplements. And lo and behold, the person was selling them to her. Right there is an immediate conflict of interest. If you're taking advice from someone who's selling you something, you should be questioning the source. You should be asking, what are your credentials? Do you understand from a scientific perspective both the pros and the cons, the risks and the benefits? Because medicinally, when qualified professionals give advice, they present the risks and the benefits, not just the benefits. And they know when there are contraindications, not things not being a good idea, and they don't go well together. But qualified professionals don't sell products for profit based on their own advice because it's a conflict of interest. So that's a huge red flag. So I went to this woman's house, and she brought out this basket of bottles and bottles that had price stickers on them, 65, 85, 120, and I will simply say to you now that they were junk. There was very little benefit to any of it. Most of it may not have even been what it claimed to be. And this person was on a budget and felt restricted in her ability to buy the nourishing foods I was suggesting because her expenditures were so great on the supplements. Now, the good news to this story is that about a year down the road, she had gradually stopped purchasing the supplements and redirected her resources into healthier foods. And she had, of course, gotten some additional medical treatment for her cancer, and her health had improved significantly. And you know what? Even if her physical health hadn't improved, the value of saving her wasted money was immense. So there are a lot of things to think about when we're looking at the needs of an individual and the fact that there's a lot of misinformation like what you see here in this hot topic, and I think it explains it quite well. So when it comes to choosing a supplement, you can certainly read all of this right here yourself, but let me tell you this. Supplements are not well regulated, and I suspect that's a surprise to many people. So I want to show you a couple of things. This is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration website. Anybody can go to this site. So you see here this acronym near the top after the year 1994 when it was passed, DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. So very briefly, because I know that this is not something that absolutely everyone always understands. You live in the United States, right? That's a great place to be for one main reason, and that is that we are a capitalist nation. In other words, you can do what you want and make as much money as you want. Nobody is telling you that there are limits to what you can make or how you can earn it. No one is controlling companies and saying you can't sell this, you can't make this. It's a free market economy. It is one of the things we are most envied for. We are also a democracy, which means that laws are passed based on the influence of citizens. So every company in our country is comprised of citizens. So when we speak of a company's interest, we are talking about the people that comprise that company. So individuals that work there, it's in their best interest to make sure that they try to do things to help their own business and industry to keep their own jobs and their own lucrative interests in mind, right? So a company is made up of people, citizens. So companies are obviously going to try to influence legislation, laws, such that they don't prohibit their ability to generate revenue or to pursue capitalist ventures. So the dietary supplement industry is a billion-dollar industry, and it is what it is because there are not really any tight regulations, and the reason for that is because the supplement industry has lobbied aggressively. So if you don't know what a lobbyist is, it's a representative, a legal representative for an industry, right? There are lobbyists for the Cattlemen's Association for beef, for the Dairy Association. There are lobbyists for the dietary supplement industry, for the lawn chemical industry, everything you can imagine. So they are people who understand legislative practices and how laws are made and how the passing of such laws or prevention of certain laws being passed is regulated. So companies and industries hire them to go stand before Congress and argue on their behalf influencing the decisions that are made, saying these people that comprise this industry are citizens, and if you pass a law that says they can't do something, then you are inhibiting their right to pursue capitalist ventures. That's it in a nutshell. Now, I can't get any more in depth for our purposes, but if you understand the basics, then you understand that a law such as DSHEA was driven by the interest of the dietary supplement industry. They went to Congress and they said, you can't regulate this product the way you regulate food because it's not food. So the FDA was given authority to regulate dietary supplement products and dietary ingredients only in very specific ways. So when you say regulate, you think it sounds like they're controlling everything, they're protecting you, but that is not what the very specific ways are about. The FDA regulates dietary supplements under a different set of regulations than those covering conventional food and drug products. The first bullet, manufacturers and distributors of dietary supplements and dietary ingredients are prohibited from marketing products that are adulterated or misbranded. So, in other words, adulterated means you've added something to it that shouldn't be there, like a form of speed in a weight loss supplement, which would definitely make someone lose weight. Okay, they're prohibited, but nobody checks. They say, don't you do that. But no one checks. No one requires products to be evaluated before they go to market. No one tests them after they go to market. They say, were you naughty? And they go, nope. And they go, okay. So, yes, I'm being a bit silly here, but that's really what it comes down to. So, as you see in the second bullet point, the FDA is responsible for taking action against any adulterated or misbranded supplement after it reaches the market. So here's what the law says. If all these products that are out there in every imaginable store, if people are buying them and using them and having ill effects and going to their doctors and saying, I use this product, this happened to me, and the doctor goes, I think you're right, and the doctor reports it to the FDA, and the FDA gets enough of those reports from doctors, then the FDA can launch an investigation, and if it proves the supplement was in fact not okay, then it can make them stop selling it. So if right now you're reeling, welcome to capitalist America. It's wonderful, but usually anything that's so wonderful has a flip side as well. So everything you're buying, there is no guarantee that what it says on the container is actually in there. There's no guarantee that the dosage is what it says. There is no science in most instances to support that it does anything special. Remember, that disclaimer that you saw in an earlier chapter is always there that says none of those things are supported. All of those claims are structure function claims. In other words, they are largely meaningless. So it is a use at your risk industry, in which case, that brings us full circle. Your best bet is to seek the guidance of a qualified medical professional who understands nutrition and supplements, which first and foremost is going to be a registered dietitian, even more so than a medical doctor, because that's not what they're keeping up with. And that person can say, you know what, I don't know if you need that. If there's a test available, we can run it, and if it shows that you need it, then I can help you decide which brand out there that's inexpensive is appropriate and what dose is appropriate, because if you don't know what you need, then you don't know what to take. And if you don't know if you need it, then why are you taking it, since it could potentially be harmful for reasons you may not even know? Really makes you think, I hope. So I encourage you to go back to this web page and scroll through a little bit and search around. So I've introduced you to the Center for Science of the Public Interest, and right here is just a good example of why this is such a big deal. So many of you are too young, I'm sure, to remember this, but ephedra was a weight loss supplement that was marketed. Basically, it was a legalized form of speed. In other words, it made everything speed up metabolically and people lost weight. it killed a lot of people. So if you look a little ways down, it says ephedra killed 155 Americans and injured thousands of others, more than any other supplement on the market. This is an example of people that were going by droves to their doctors and saying, oh my gosh, I'm not okay, and then realizing the connection and the doctors reported it. Or people died and the doctors found out that they'd been taking this and that's what had killed them. So it was banned, finally. They made tons of money off of this. So right here it says, court decision reverses ban on dangerous ephedra. And it goes on to explain to you that this decision leaves no doubt that the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act prevents the FDA from taking unsafe products off the market. So I will let you go back and read this if you wish. All you have to do is type in CSPI, ephedra ban, or dietary supplements, and it will come up. So I'm just sharing with you some more meaningful examples. So on that note, if you have more questions, you can certainly post those, but hopefully I've given you some depth of insight. So when it comes to choosing a supplement, really, quite honestly, your best bet is simply to ask a dietitian. And I will share one other thing with you. consumerlabs.org. Notice that it's .org, not .com. You have to pay for this, but it's not expensive on an annual basis. And what this is an organization that is completely unbiased. So they are not influenced by donations, advertising, anything. They only use your membership fees to fund what they do, and they go into the marketplace and they select products and they take them to their laboratory and they test them and they post the results. Does it contain what it says it contains? What does this nutrient or this substance supposedly do, and what science is there to support it, or is it lacking? It is the best site I have ever found for these things, and as a healthcare professional, it would certainly be something that you could appreciate, and hopefully you're enthusiastic enough on a personal level that you might want to start utilizing it in your own life and get accustomed to it so that then you have the benefit of utilizing it to help patients. All right, let's go back here. So, vitamin classification. You see right here provitamins and preforms. So pro would indicate that something comes before something, right? If you're proactive, you're being active in advance. So provitamin is what is happening before there's an actual active vitamin. So that's what I want you to understand. So vitamin D being a prime example, when we are exposed to sunlight, it triggers the fat in our skin, which is actually a cholesterol, to start producing a substance. And this substance is a provitamin, a precursor to actual vitamin D. It then is hydroxylated, which is a fancy word for converted in our liver into another substance, a different form of vitamin D that is not yet fully active. It does do some good things in the body, but it's not yet the maximum potential. And then that substance goes through our kidneys for the final hydroxylation or conversion, and then it becomes what is known as truly active vitamin D, which is technically functioning as a hormone in our body. So you can see if somebody had an impaired liver or impaired kidneys, how the body's ability to synthesize or create active vitamin D would be impaired. So when you know about nutrients and you know about anatomy and physiology, then you can reconcile where there are true concerns for deficiency that actually are not based in diet, right? For example, I specialize in people with end-stage renal failure. They are on life support because their kidneys no longer work adequately to support human life. So obviously they're going to have issues with synthesizing vitamin D, so we often give them oral versions or intravenous versions of activated vitamin D. Now, giving them too little and too much has consequences, so all of that has to be monitored, and we'll actually look at some of that in a bit. So you get into your A deck. Remember A deck, alphabetical order, A, D, E, K. Those are your fat-soluble vitamins. You definitely want to skim through this. You don't have to commit every word to memory, but hopefully you're going to find some of it pretty amazing, and you're going to see different words here that hopefully are planting a seed in your mind. For example, right here, vitamin A is important to the body's immune response. You know what an immune response is: fighting your body's battles by participating in maintenance of circulating levels of natural killer cells, attacking things, increasing phagocytic activity. Phagocytosis is when cells engulf things and destroy them, and producing cytokines involved in inflammation. So your body releases these chemical substances called cytokines when it's threatened or injured. The body's natural response to injury is what? Inflammation. So you can see where the vitamin A is going to help your body combat all of the injury it's sustaining when under attack. Keep in mind, though, when you read something like this, I just learned cytokines are a chemical released in response to inflammation. That's a good thing in my immune response. But if you know that, what do you think is the problem when there is excess cytokine production because there is so much inflammation? Food for thought. Plant the seed so that at a later date it will be meaningful to you. So I'm not going to read all of this to you. I will point out that there's a great little chart here. I'm not worried about you knowing milligrams and grams because only a dietitian needs to sweat the details, and quite honestly, I rarely have the need to sweat those kind of details. But go through here. Look for these words that are new to you. Glance through. I don't expect you to memorize all of these foods because really what it comes down to is balance and variety. But I will say one thing, and I hope you write this down because it will benefit you in many ways to come personally and in this course, hint, hint, hint. Pretty much any question that somebody can ask, how do I prevent this disease? How do I make my immune system stronger? How do I promote my health? Comes down to two food groups: beans, that should be no surprise, and greens. And I'm pretty much known career-wise for saying everything is all about the beans and the greens. So as you read through here, you're going to kind of start to see that pattern. Green leafy vegetables, what we call cruciferous vegetables. Now, cauliflower is a cruciferous vegetable. It's white, which proves that when people say don't eat white foods, that's not good advice. But anyway, back to the greens. Green leafy vegetables, so kale, spinach, Swiss chard, collard greens, asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and beans of all kinds. Beans and greens. All right, let me click through here. Vitamin D I have mentioned a little bit, so I think when you read that, now that I've made the comments I've made, it will be beneficial. You see a really great image here that reiterates what I was talking about. Now let me show you something cool. You see the sun is striking his skin and it's creating a precursor to active vitamin D, or the pro-vitamin form. He's taking in some vitamin D from his diet, and we get very little from our diet, so it's not a great source, which is why sunlight is important. Now we live in this society where everybody is like petrified of the sun because, again, we tend to do everything in excess, right? We're not good with balance and moderation. So getting some sun is ideal, getting too much is not ideal. So now we have people avoiding the sun in every way, shape, and form, and they're not getting enough sun exposure, and so if not a deficiency, they end up with a vitamin D insufficiency, and that low-level insufficiency over many, many years does take a toll on health and contribute to the onset of a variety of diseases. So we've got to master this balance thing. You can see that that precursor or provitamin form, as I mentioned, goes through the liver where it's converted, and then it goes through the kidneys. There are actually two kidneys, and it is converted in the kidneys. And so you can see it has many roles here, right? So one thing that I want you to think about in this image is that if somebody is taking in calcium what is it doing? Well, I think we're all going to first think of a bone, right? You know it's making bones strong. So calcium and phosphorus are the two minerals you'll learn about in the next chapter that comprise bone. So if the kidney is able to convert the precursor or provitamin form of vitamin D into the active form known as calcitriol or 1,25-OHD3, as you see here, then that vitamin D is what's helping the bone absorb calcium to make it strong. So what happens if the kidney function is impaired and it cannot generate active vitamin D? Then the bones won't absorb calcium, and as the cells turn over and can't replenish themselves, what happens to the bone? It becomes porous and more brittle and more likely to break. So there you can see a very logical connection. For people with kidney disease, chronic kidney disease or end-stage renal disease, impaired mineralization of bones is a huge problem. And I will talk more about that at a later date. But this picture is planting the seed. And you see that little thing there, the parathyroid glands? Plant a little seed in your mind. Put a little note somewhere. We're going to talk again about that at a later date. Laying the groundwork. All right, a little bit of content at the bottom. This right here, the Prevent Cancer, I encourage you to read. You have a question based on that. You can see here what I said, not a lot of great vitamin D food sources. I wouldn't encourage everybody to start guzzling any of those foods to get it. Again, sun is really important for that. Now, who should be taking vitamin D supplements? People who've actually had the blood test that confirms that they are insufficient or deficient. If you've never had your vitamin D level checked, then how do you know what it is? And if you don't know what it is, how do you know you need to take a supplement, right? There's logic there. We can't just walk around self-diagnosing because we literally have no way to know. And when people self-diagnose and take things that are poorly regulated, then they don't know if those things are going to interact with other things they're taking, other supplements, other medications, disease states, and actually cause more problems or do more harm than good. That's the difference between being a qualified healthcare professional and a layman. That's why you're going to college, right? All right, I don't let you read all this on your own. Here's the term insufficiency that you hear me mention. Talks here a little bit about osteomalacia and osteopenia and osteoporosis and rickets. Whew, 4 words that are very much related but do not mean the same thing, so read carefully. We're looking at vitamin E once we get to this page. Again, skimming through here, looking at the key functions of it, the concerns associated with toxicity, since that's our biggest concern. And consistently, you're going to see beans and greens usually solve all our problems, and that stands true for vitamin K as well. Some really fascinating stuff here that you want to read about if you don't know it is how vitamin K plays a role in blood clotting, and hence there's an issue with dietary intake of vitamin K potentially being a problem with certain medications designed to thin blood. So if vitamin K helps your blood clot, and you are being given medications to prevent your blood from clotting because maybe you already have cardiovascular disease and more blood clots make more problems more likely, then the idea is not to stop consuming vitamin K. That is old school advice. And unfortunately, there are still medical facilities giving handouts to people that say, don't eat any green leafy vegetables. Vitamin K is the enemy. That is not true, because when people begin to eliminate healthy foods from their diet, they eliminate the healthy components of those foods that they need for a multitude of reasons. So instead, what is advised, and it's stated here in your book, is that people have a consistent intake of those foods. They don't suddenly increase or dramatically decrease their intake. They don't have a pot of collard greens one day and nothing green for a week. That they have a steady, consistent intake. And I'm going to be quite frank, a healthy diet has a steady, consistent intake of beans and greens. There's just no way around that. So you will also see some interesting things with regard to what we do with infants, which will be mentioned again later. So please do read the vitamin K section very carefully and take some notes for your benefit now and later. Water soluble. So you know A deck is fat. So what's that leave? B and C, right? The B's and C's, the easy peas. In other words, when you take in more B's and C's than you need, whether it's from food and both are abundant in a multitude of foods, or you take in more than you need in supplement form, then it just dissolves right into the water in your body, which is what becomes the urine, which means all that money just got flushed down the toilet. Again, how do you know you need it if you haven't been medically assessed? We really don't have a lot of tests for B's and C's. We can do a little bit of work with the B's, but as you'll see here, there are a lot of B vitamins. And more often than not, that can be easily remedied with a diet. And there are a lot of reasons that taking B and C vitamin supplements is a problem. So read very carefully and familiarize yourself and know the things that most people don't know so that you are especially well qualified. You know, my goal in this course, and I have no hesitation in saying it, is to turn you into, in essence, a mini nutrition expert, because I'm a realist. Some dietitians feel very threatened by other professionals knowing a lot about nutrition. I don't see it that way at all. I know that other professionals, especially nurses, are at the forefront, that people in society are more likely to encounter a nurse than they ever are to encounter a dietitian. Most of you have never encountered a dietitian in your patient world, right? Being a patient yourself. So I don't want nurses to be promoting misinformation or to not be knowledgeable. What I do want is for nurses to know the limits of their knowledge, just like I hope doctors and physical therapists and everyone else will, and to say, I don't know if they don't know. But I will find out. I'll ask a dietitian, or you can talk to a dietitian and direct them to one if possible. But I also want you to be able to know enough that you can help some people on a very basic level in a way that they might not otherwise be helped. So I hope that you're feeling very empowered in that respect, as well as for your own personal benefit. So you're going to see as you go through these pages all the information on the different classifications of B vitamins. I don't feel that I need to read all of this to you. You see some of the signs and symptoms, the cracking in the corners of the mouth. Now, mind you, that can happen for other reasons, like just not too much sun exposure, cold weather, so that doesn't automatically flag a deficiency. But in someone where a deficiency would seem logical, someone with alcoholism or other diseases of malabsorption of nutrients, that could be a very realistic sign and symptom, flagging a deficiency. As you go through here, again, great images. Pellagra is one of the vitamin deficiency diseases that is easily resolved with the introduction of more of that particular vitamin to the diet. Again, preferably in food form. Folate. When you think greens and beans, think folate. When you think the moment of conception of a child, you better hope some folate's there and plenty of it, because irreversible problems in growth and development occur. Sometimes things that people aren't aware of until somebody's fully grown, but obvious deformities if there is a gross deficiency. So women of childbearing age, meaning those who are still menstruating, are usually the ones who have the least healthy diets in today's society, because they're still eating a bunch of junk. And those are the ones that if they conceive and haven't had a healthy diet, their children are going to suffer the consequences, either in the immediate or down the road. So food for thought if you're young and careless with your eating habits. Let's admit this, not all pregnancies are planned, right? So it's one thing to decide that someone wants to get healthy in preparation for getting pregnant. It's another thing to not be living a healthy lifestyle and to conceive a child, decide to follow through with that, and that child suffers. healthy eating matters at all ages, and you're going to realize that more and more and more as we proceed. And contrary to popular belief, it matters more the younger you are. In other words, as a toddler, as a school-age child, as an adolescent, and as a woman of childbearing years than it does later in life. So we've got to stop thinking, oh, young people are resilient. It doesn't matter if they eat healthy. They'll overcome it. No, it just takes years for the harm to accrue, and so it takes its toll after they have aged a bit. So there's your childbearing comment right there. Vitamin B12. Please read B12. The others you can skim. B12 you need to read very carefully. There are reasons outlined on these pages that you will encounter in real life that are highly relevant. Pernicious anemia, if that's a new term to you, the word anemia is generic. There are different types of anemia, like iron deficiency anemia, but pernicious anemia is associated with a deficiency of B12. So read, take some notes. You're welcome to ask questions if there's a need. All right, so that takes us to the end of this chapter, and by now you know how all of that works. So I'm just going to click through and get us to the next section. A lot of references to minerals. Okay, pause, take a break, whatever you need to do. We're getting to the next section, which is a different substance. Get your head around that, right? So, same concepts. You can get minerals adequately through food with rare exceptions, and only under the advice of a qualified medical professional is it wise to use supplements. Consuming a calcium supplement at the same time as an iron supplement can decrease iron absorption. I bet you didn't know that. How many women do you think take calcium and iron supplements and have no idea that one is canceling out the other? Because who gave them the guidance? Their friend? A television show? A magazine article? Wait, perhaps it was the person at the store selling the product. My cynicism has a point, right? So alcohol causes decreased absorption and increased urinary losses of zinc. So how are we losing things? We're losing them in lots of ways. We may be getting plenty, but we may be losing things. So you've got to look at the big picture. Much fewer smaller, shorter list of key terms here. Bioavailability. Let me draw your attention to that. Bio is life, right? The study of life or an organism and how it functions is biology. So bioavailable. How well does the body use something? How available is it to the systems of the body to be utilized? So nutrients that are contained within whole foods that nature creates are those most well recognized and best utilized by the body. In other words, they are most bioavailable. Man cannot replicate anything in nature from a nutrient to a kidney in perfect replication form. It's impossible. We don't understand things well enough to replicate things perfectly. So something gets lost in transition, and therefore the effects are not identical. So food is always the best source. Supplements are as a backup in addition to a healthy diet when deemed medically necessary. So why do we even need minerals? Minerals are inorganic, so they're not carbon-based. That's the difference between vitamins and minerals right there, that originate from rocks within the Earth's crust. Think about that. The Earth's crust, the ground, is made of minerals. So anything that comes from the ground, be it a plant or water bubbling up in a stream or an ocean, contains minerals. Then we consume those things that originate from the earth, hence we get the minerals. Well, if a cow eats the grass and you eat the cow, then that's how you got the minerals. So minerals are ubiquitous. They are everywhere because ultimately everything is of the earth. And that is because nature knew that we needed them. We need them in minute amounts but we need them. So with balance and variety, we usually can get what we need, but the moment that we start adding them to things, excess becomes a problem, whether it's from a supplement or as a preservative. So as you continue onto this page, interaction action, drug nutrition interactions occur with minerals for several reasons. Very important section there. Please pay close attention to that. You're probably going to see some things you hadn't thought about, but that are actually relevant possibly to you even personally. So 16 essential minerals are needed in the diet for health. You know what essential means. It means the body must get it from food because it cannot make it. Major minerals are present in the body in larger quantities. So trace minerals are present in smaller amounts. So it doesn't mean they're more or less important. It just means they're more or less prevalent. So what are the major minerals? Calcium and phosphorus I've mentioned. So your teeth and your bones are primarily made of calcium and phosphorus. Calcium and phosphorus are in most everything. Phosphorus is in everything. Another mineral is magnesium. I'm sure you've heard of sulfur, and I know you've heard of sodium, and then there's potassium and chloride. One thing that you might want to write down right now, do you know what the word agonist means? In other words, if you've read a story and there was the protagonist, right, and then there's the antagonist. So when things work together, they work in an agonistic fashion. If they work against each other, it's antagonistic. So sodium is something that pulls water in one direction, and potassium pulls water in the opposite direction. They work in an antagonistic fashion. That's important. So you look at calcium. In recent years, the need for calcium in health and disease prevention has broadened to include more than just building strong bones and teeth. We now know that it's at the cellular level really, really important, and it may lower the risk of certain chronic diseases. So you're going to see that there are a lot of foods that contain calcium that you might not have even thought about, and that kind of supports the fact that you can get it in a lot of different ways very easily. So overview of major minerals. This is going to be somewhat helpful to you for answering some questions, so take a moment and utilize this. Notice right here you've got green leafy vegetables right in the middle of the screen, and you've got beans popping up everywhere. A little bit of lifespan information there that is useful, especially right here. I would take a little glance through that, and you see the word osteoporosis. I think it's going to help you to understand that better. Again, a wonderful, wonderful visual. Now, what I want to do here is reiterate what I showed you in the other chapter, right? So here's what happens. Homeostasis, right? Keeping everything in balance. I want you to remember that minerals are inside solid structures like your bone and your teeth, but they are also circulating your blood. That's how they get to all of the cells they need to go to do different things they need to do. So you know that when we process vitamin D, it allows us to better absorb calcium. And so if we are absorbing adequate calcium, then every time there is cell turnover in the bone, the cells that make it up are dying, then more calcium is absorbed into the bone and new cells are formed. And hence we have bone homeostasis. And as long as everything's functioning normally, there's no impaired function in the body, there will always be a balance in the bone and in the blood. Now, let's say that the levels in the blood begin to build up excessively. Obviously, too much calcium floating around means that calcium, which solidifies, is going to solidify in places it should not solidify, in tissues that aren't meant to solidify, the penis, the breast, the joints, and that calcified state is going to be problematic. So a concern with any kind of mineral balance disruption is that excess minerals build up and could cause an adverse effect such as that. Now, let's talk about kidney disease for a moment. Your kidneys are like a filter for your body, and their main job is to take fluid in, which contains waste products, the byproducts of metabolism, as well as excess vitamins and minerals. Your body says, I got what I needed, here you go, you can flush the rest. And it goes out in the form of your urine. But if your filters, your kidneys, are not working properly, then it's like the filter is jammed or clogged, like a coffee filter. Nothing's flowing through it. Or like a sink drain and everything's backing up. And all those minerals begin to back up into your body to toxic levels. So you heard me say a moment ago, phosphorus is in everything. So people with kidney disease are going to get phosphorus because it's in everything. There's no way they can avoid it. And the kidneys won't excrete the excess. Well, when phosphorus builds up in the blood, the natural inclination of calcium is to bind to it. We say that calcium has an affinity for phosphorus. It binds to it. Now, picture the body looking around going, hey, where'd the calcium go? Where'd the calcium go? I don't see any calcium. I know where I can get some. I'll pull it out of my storage reserves, the bones. So the body begins to pull the calcium out of the bones. Okay, wait, what's happening to the bones now? They're becoming weak and brittle. Wait, now there's extra calcium in the blood because there already is some there. The body just couldn't see it because it's bound to the phosphorus. So now there's too much calcium in the blood. So you're going to get that calcification throughout the body in undesirable locations, and you're going to get weak and brittle bones. When your kidneys fail, you will die because they regulate these processes. It's a big deal, nutrition. So this is why we have something like dialysis. It's life support. It's an external kidney in most cases. So we'll look at these things later in disease states, but you can see these images are trying to help you to better understand this. So you remember that PTH I pointed out in the last chapter, and you see it again here. When there is an imbalance of minerals in the blood, when the phosphorus level is high because it can't flush out through the kidney, then the parathyroid glands reach up and touch your neck, right where you know an Adam's apple would be on a man. Most people know they got a thyroid gland in there. Para means around or surrounding. So there are 4 little glands surrounding the thyroid, parathyroid glands. They secrete a hormone, parathyroid hormone, PTH. So when the phosphorus is high and the body can't see the calcium because it's bound to the phosphorus, the parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone, PTH, and that says, pull calcium out of the bones. So that is something we have to treat. Medical management of diseases is oftentimes based on disruptions in nutrition metabolism. And that's why medical nutrition therapy, which is what registered dietitians practice, has a key role. So the more that you understand this, the more you can work in concert harmoniously to assist other professionals like the doctor and the dietitian, and you can be on the same page with them to help educate the patient. This may seem overwhelming right now. Don't get too taxed. I hope you're enjoying understanding how your body works, because I personally think it's fascinating, and I'm not going to expect you to be an expert at these details. We'll get to disease chapters later, but I'm hoping that this will have stuck with you to a certain degree. All right. Do go through all of the calcium details. And let's see. Right down here at the bottom, seldom is a low blood level of calcium related to diet or poor calcium stores. So when we test people's blood and we test the calcium, it really isn't about what they're eating, right? Hypocalcemia, low calcium, occurs from existing medical conditions or treatments. Examples include hypoparathyroid disease, pancreatitis, and certain cancers. So if we see low blood calcium levels when we're testing someone's blood, we want to go, why is it low? What's driving that? We don't just automatically say you need to eat more calcium, because it may have nothing to do with that. So blood tests are what flag us to investigate and figure out what's causing the problem, because until you know what's causing a problem, you don't know how to treat it. So if what's causing the low calcium is cancer, the person doesn't need more calcium-rich food. They need cancer treatment, right? Think like this. All right, you can read this stuff on your own here. I'm not going to spend too terribly much time on these pages. You can see a great visual. I always say that a healthy bone looks like a solid bar of soap, and an unhealthy bone looks like Swiss cheese, which is there on the right. You can see that gradual deterioration that occurs over time. So as we age, that cell turnover, remember at 30, you're kind of at the peak of the roller coaster, and sadly, it is all downhill from there. Bone turnover is slowing, you're losing more cells than you're replenishing, and so depending upon what someone's life was like up until age 30, if they were really physically active, especially with weight-bearing activities, walking, things that required their legs to be pounding the ground, or strength training from their upper body using resistance, then that's helping to solidify the bone so that it will stay solid longer and preserve the integrity of the bone. By the time you start to get to the other side of 30, there's not a whole lot you can do to go back and make up for that bone loss. If young people did not have adequate calcium and other things like vitamin D in their diet growing up, then if they didn't have enough D because they never got any sun because they were inside playing video games and they never ate anything healthy, they just drank soda, then perhaps they're not going to have enough calcium in their body, and they're not going to have enough vitamin D to help them absorb what calcium they do have, and by the time they reach 30, they can't go back and make up for those losses. They're hung with that. So maybe that's why one person ends up with more porous bones at age 40, whereas another person it takes them to 70. Lifestyle from birth until 30 dictates much of what happens from that point forward. So a little bit on the topic of supplements. I'm not going to go through this too much. I'm going to let you read that on your own. And here's good old phosphorus that's absolutely in everything. So there are food sources that are higher and lower or middle of the range, but ultimately it is everywhere. And magnesium pops up at the middle here. That is really not something that the average person has to think much about despite its popularity. It's more related to specific disease states. And it tells you right here, true deficiency of magnesium is rare because the bone maintains a large reservoir of the mineral and the kidneys limit excretion of the mineral when conservation is needed. So obviously somebody with impaired kidney function might have issues. But again, that's not about diet, that's about an underlying disease process. Get over here, scroll down. Sulfate is mentioned, and the word electrolytes. Everybody's heard the word. Many people don't realize that several of the minerals in our body function as electrolytes. So yes, sodium, potassium, and chloride are minerals, but they are the minerals that function as the electrolytes, right? And again, I don't want to take a lot of time reading because you're more than capable. Sodium and chloride. So what is salt? Well, two things, and you might want to make a note of this if it helps you better understand. The word salt in chemistry means a compound of two minerals. So it could be sodium plus chloride, it could be potassium plus chloride, right? So when two minerals compound, they form a salt. You, when you speak of salt, actually mean the stuff that's on the table that looks white and granular in the shaker. Table salt happens to be the compound of two minerals, sodium and chloride. So table salt is actually about 40% sodium and about 60% chloride. So actually, it's not even mostly sodium. So statistically speaking, when we evaluate diets in this country and we do those ongoing surveys you learned about early in the book, where we're constantly looking at what people are eating and drawing correlations between that and health problems so that we can then make nutrient recommendations for the country, well, we're finding that most of the sodium intake in most people's diets is not from table salt. Because, sure, there's always somebody we know that dumps salt on everything, but most people use a little salt here and there, and it's only 40% sodium. Most sodium intake is coming from sodium-based preservatives. Monosodium diphosphate, monosodium glutamate, disodium triphosphate, and so on and so on and so on. Anything with the word sodium in it, that's some weird word you've never heard of, is a sodium-based preservative. And they're used because they make things shelf-stable longer. They are preservatives, right? So salt is the oldest known preservative to man because salt draws water out of stuff. So if you coat meat in salt, as has been done for much of history before refrigeration, it pulls the fluid out. It dehydrates the meat. And without moisture, bacteria do not thrive. And without bacteria, meat cannot decay. So the decay of a dead animal, what we call meat, was much slower if it was cured in salt. So think salt-cured ham, think bacon. That's why these things came to be, not just because people liked the salty taste of these meats, right? It served a preservative purpose. Nowadays, we don't want everything to taste that salty and be coated in salt. So if manufacturers use sodium, which is what's drawing the water out, but they don't connect it with chloride, you won't get that taste you call table salt. They connect it with other minerals and other substances to make these compounds that exert the same effects without the same flavor component or palatability component. So you can consume a lot of sodium and not have a speck of salt available. So what I have found in my profession is that people will regularly say to me, I'm not using salt. And then we examine what they're eating, and they are eating out at restaurants, which has exorbitant amounts of sodium because all the ingredients contain sodium, and then the restaurants are actually adding salt to food, and then the patrons are adding salt at the table. We also find that so much of what people are buying in the store these days in our convenience-based lifestyle are heavily processed, highly preserved goods, and so they have a lot of sodium in them. So what I like to do is give people good news, and I like to say, listen, if we can shift your choices to ingredients that you can assemble into enjoyable meals, and those ingredients are low in sodium because it doesn't have any taste anyway, then you can sit down and actually add salt to your meals, which does taste good because that will be your primary source of sodium, and you're far less likely to get too much in that respect. So I hope this is making sense to everybody because this is really the crux of some real life advice that you can give to people. So as you read this section, think about what I've shared with you. Let's see, clicking through. Lots of great information right here. Good patient education checklist. Potassium, right here. Potassium is considered a nutrient of concern in the U.S. dietary guidelines because fewer than 5% of Americans meet the recommended guideline. So what did I already share with you? I shared that potassium is an antagonist. So what I want you to do visually is picture a blood vessel, kind of like a cross section of it. Look inside the vessel. You see the fluid running through the vessel. Your serum, your blood component is made of fluid, right? You're largely made of fluid. So that blood is flowing through there. Now picture all your trillions of body cells which have fluid inside them, intracellular. And they're bathed and floating and surrounded by fluid, extracellular. So as the blood flows through the blood vessel, if there is a lot of sodium in the blood, then it acts like a magnet and it pulls the fluid from the cells and the extracellular spaces into the bloodstream, increasing the volume of fluid in the blood vessel. Well, the blood vessel is like a hose. If the volume of fluid in a hose increases, won't that hose expand, and won't there be a great deal of pressure on the walls of that hose, as in elevated blood pressure? So high sodium in genetically sensitive people, and you don't know if you are or not until you have a problem, so it's best to assume you could be and err on the side of caution. So that high sodium draws all that fluid in and creates high blood pressure, damaging the walls of the blood vessels and beginning a cascade of negative compounding events. So what do you do to counter that? You make sure to get a lot of potassium in the diet, because potassium has the reverse effect. It draws the fluid back out of the blood vessels and back into the appropriate intracellular and extracellular spaces. Well, where do you get potassium? All kinds of plant foods, and especially beans and greens. But fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, potassium is everywhere. Yes, you think a banana, that's the least of it. Prunes are a fabulous source of potassium. Oranges, tomatoes, potatoes. Yes, potatoes. I'm not talking French fries. I'm not talking potato chips. I'm not talking a giant baked potato smothered in sour cream and cheese and butter and bacon bits. I'm talking potatoes prepared in a reasonable manner, right? So overall, a healthy diet is high in potassium and low in sodium. We live in a culture where healthy diets don't prevail, and people's diets are high in sodium, and as you can see here from this page, low in potassium, hence the correlation to our largely preventable diseases such as cardiovascular disease. All right, hope I'm not overwhelming you. Starts getting into the trace minerals. Again, skim through it. Don't sweat the details. Iron is probably one of the more relevant ones to pay attention to. Hence, some questions are based on that. Pica. I would read pica. If you don't know what pica is, you're about to learn something. And like I said before, don't sweat all the details. Skim through your zinc. It's always good to read the first sentence of every paragraph. It really gives you a nice synopsis. Selenium's not one you're going to have to think too hard about ever. Fluoride, perhaps by reading this you can dispel a myth or two. And chromium and iodine are not things worth sweating a lot, nor are manganese. And to this day I'm not even sure exactly how to pronounce that. Molybdenum. And that takes us to the end of this. So let me click through so we can wrap this up pretty quickly, because I think the next chapter is largely self-explanatory. Come on. So fluid, water, right? Fluid, anything that's fluid, whether it's coffee or tea or soda or plain water, counts as water. So that's why they use the word fluid, because people get all hung up on water being pure water. What we mean is that the body is made largely of water, which is derived from all fluids. And then it gets into caffeine and alcohol, both, I should point out to you because this escapes people, both of which are legal drugs. So don't forget that those are drugs, right? The unique thing about alcohol is that it is a non-nutrient substance. It is, in fact, a drug, which contains calories, 7 calories per gram, in fact. So most of us have a hard enough time getting all of the myriad of nutrients we need and staying within our calorie limits as it is, so a lot of times alcohol calories are simply a source of excess calories. So when everybody's hung up on what causes weight gain, you know now that excess calories from any source cause weight gain. For a lot of people, the problem is alcohol. I'm mostly going to let you read this independently. I don't feel like this chapter needs a whole lot of narration. I just want to point out a couple of things right here. Box 8-1, really, really absorb that. Kind of take a few moments, read each of those statements, let it sink in, mentally process what it's saying, because I do believe that people have a hard time grasping that we are about 60% fluid, or rather water, and that is so essential to our body chemistry. That is the medium for all the chemistry within our body, and that when there is a disruption in fluid homeostasis, there is therefore a disruption in the chemical processes that will be occurring within that cellular setting, right? And so something as simple as fluid shifts can have immense repercussions. So think like this: when we test people's blood, right, we're taking out the fluid portion of the blood and we're measuring its components. Things like its iron content, its glucose content. Well, if somebody has too much fluid, they are fluid overloaded, then it's going to dilute those components and make them seem like there are fewer of them. In other words, a false low test result. So we think, oh, there's not enough of this, when in fact there is. There's just too much fluid, so it's diluted. If they restored themselves to normal hydration status, then the parts per million would shift, and it would actually be more accurate. By the same token, if someone is dehydrated, then levels of certain things are going to look very high when in fact they're not. They're just much more concentrated, and we simply need to hydrate people, which is why as nurses you're often going to be administering normal saline, right, to hydrate people, to restore fluid balance so that our blood test, in other words, our biochemical assessments, our laboratory assays are more accurate. I don't think you'll be a bit surprised to hear that all the hype over bottled water is just hype, because at this point you're starting to go, oh my goodness, everything I ever thought I knew is just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? So I am saving you so much money. I hope you're thinking that right now. Right now you're either really frustrated or you're just feeling like you are the winner in all of this. All right, what else do we want to see? Some of my points are outlined here, just making sure I'm not forgetting anything. I think every nurse should be familiar with risk factors for dehydration, just like every medic is. Is thirst an adequate measure of hydration? You know, looking at urine tells us a lot, just like looking at poop tells a lot. So if you become an expert in poop and pee, you'll be very useful. If your urine is really dark or really yellow, then there's not adequate hydration. If it is so pale that it almost looks like water, then perhaps there's overhydration. Of course, it can also mean other things. Certain medications can discolor urine, so on and so forth. Smells can be influenced. If you don't know about asparagus, asparagus is going to contain a sulfuric acid that makes your pee smell. Great activity if you've got a gullible small child, usually in the 8 to 10-year-old range, especially boys. Bet them $50 you can make their pee smell within 30 minutes. You'll never have to pay out. Feed them some asparagus and make them pee 30 minutes later, and they will be blown away at your magic. Yeah, I've done that. That's where I got that, right? Sources of caffeine are going to be mentioned here, and I do think you're going to find some interesting details here about caffeine that are insightful. Now, you know, we're not talking about coffee. We're talking about caffeine, right? Caffeine's in a lot of things: tea, coffee, sodas, energy drinks. So caffeine is a concern, but don't confuse that with saying coffee is a concern. What is coffee and what is tea? They are plants, right? And both of them have immense health benefits. There are people for whom consumption of caffeinated beverages of any kind is contraindicated because of the effects of caffeine. But that's why there's decaffeinated tea, decaffeinated coffee, and so on. And while sodas and energy drinks, no matter what you do to them, don't have any health benefits other than the fact that they're fluid, coffee and tea are plants, and they actually have numerous health benefits. We know that a reasonable intake of coffee, for example, is one of the contributing factors to the prevention of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and so on. So I still hear a lot of people say they think that drinking coffee is bad. Drinking too much coffee is a problem for many reasons, but you cannot blanket label most things that simply. So again, I think most of this will be very easy for you to understand without a lot of my guidance. So I think hopefully that leaves us at a good place. I hope everything I've said makes sense because I've just been free flowing through here. If I said anything confusing or contradictory, let me know, and I am more than happy for you to post questions as always.